Caddis Maximus here, this time with just a short video of some original SK tools. I even have an old logo. When I talk about original SK tools, it's the original Sherman Clove Tool Company. SKs have that unfortunate history of having been bought and sold several times. They were sold, and at some point they were re-bought out by the original owners. They were associated with SK Wayne. I don't know the entire history, but it was always kind of a shame. What I do know is I have one slightly newer socket, but the original SKs were just like this. They had kind of a brush finish on the bottom of the socket, some knurling. Surprisingly enough, original SKs didn't have USA printed on them, and the distinctive rounded end, which was traditional with sockets back in the mid part of the 19th century. 20th century, excuse me, I always get that confused. This is a slightly newer SK. I don't know if this was before they'd been sold the first time, but they did update them to say SK Tools, but they still had the rounded end. I believe one of the reasons that they stopped doing these kind of rounded end on sockets, even though I like them for reach, is really for strength issues, because many times when you're working on fasteners, I should get a more appropriate size here for this bolt, is the fact that when you're really putting a lot of torque on, maybe some sideways stress, the socket's extra thin right at the tip, and that kind of allows a crack to want to propagate if it is going to crack on you. And so I think it's one of the reasons they stopped doing it. Plus, it's just more manufacturing process. Anyway, I always thought these SKs, the old ones, were really nice. If we can just see in there, let me get a flashlight here. Here we are. I finally got a flashlight. But they did put in little detents. Now the little cutouts for the ball, or excuse me, for the detent to retain sockets is still one of those processes that is a manual machining process. If we look inside here, these are traditional, where they are actually billet steel that's actually been drilled at multiple diameters, had a broach run through to get the socket splines, and then they cut out the buildup of metal. Some manufacturers just don't get rid of the metal. Here's a proto, and they just leave it in there, and that prevents the bolt from wanting to go too deep into the socket. And that was always been another issue with the sockets that had an undercut, is if you're all the way down, then the bolt would only be engaging just on the bottom of the splines. What's really changed with modern sockets is and I am pretty clueless, is the assumption that modern sockets use blind broaches. These aren't broached at all. These are just simply forged. The sockets like these are a 5-step forging process, and just slightly better heat treatments, just better purity, even better modern steels used as forging dies. Now they don't have to do any of the drilling and the undercutting. These shavings don't occur because they're not running a broach. This is actually like the final forging process. And there's some YouTube videos about how snap-on sockets are made, and that's what it is. The forging machine just goes along and just forges it out, and at the final step, it just jams in the final sizing forging die, and it gives you the splines and everything, and that's why they have the scrape marks, is because it just sizes it and then draws it back out. So it's not cutting material that was on the bottom of the socket, it's just hammering the whole thing in there. And so modern sockets technically are a bit stronger, just because even the socket splines themselves are now a forged process, where they were forged but into a rough shape and then machined, which is not quite as good crystalline alignment. That being said, if I find a couple more of these more worn SK sockets, just because they are old doesn't mean that they're weak. We can see that there is just a little bit of damage at the top of the socket, but when we look, it's not like the splines are worn out. This is just a socket that's just gotten a little beat up on the end, like any other modern socket would. What is interesting is on the smaller sizes, they did use 6-point. They had 6-point on the small ones, just because the 12-point teeth would be too small, but on all the larger ones, they were 12-point. This set did come with the breaker bar, the original diamond logo, and that was really what I bought this whole set for. Kind of hard to find these old original SK breaker bars, and they really were pretty heavy duty. Nice heavy duty forged head. Nice large diameter handle with knurling. I really like tools that have knurling, and then they were intelligent by also making it a 1/2 inch extension, which always seems to be missing on modern breaker bars. And I don't know why they quit doing that, just because when you buy one of those big 24-inch breaker bars, it might be nice to have it as just a big extension as well. And then getting back to the 6-point socket, it's really held up pretty well. There's a lot of grease and coolant in some of these, so they definitely were used. Anyway, I just wanted to make a video. I'm probably half a century too late in making a video about these particular SK sockets, but SK is a well-liked brand, and these are the sockets and that helped them build their name. And at the time, they really were expensive. I mean, come on now. You have a chrome plated with a brush finish, dual finish on the socket, and just all the different machine work. Definitely not cheap. And what's surprising is they're manufactured like this because, with the multiple drilling, and because they had to work with the manufacturing tooling that they had at the time. What's hilarious is modern sockets are both manufactured in 5 steps and entirely forged, including the square and the flutes. That if you were to start a tool company and try to make sockets like this using all these different machining processes, I mean, they would be more expensive than Snap-ons. And that's what's kind of surprising, is if you were to use the old methods, they would be way more expensive than the modern methods, and arguably not quite as good a quality in fit and finish. Quality meaning like there's an undercut, so if you're working with real thin head bolts, that can become an issue. And maybe a little bit on the strength. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.